Hello, everyone, and welcome. Apologies for the slight delay at the start here to this webinar today, in which we're going to focus in on planning hybrid learning with G Suite. And so today's webinar is really focused on thinking about how we plan and set up for this period of learning that we're in right now around hybrid learning. So welcome. My name's Andy Caffrey. I'm a Google Certified Innovator and Certified Trainer, former geography teacher, and I work for Canopy here in the UK. Today, I'm joined on the webinar by Ben Whitaker from Burnley College, who's also a Google Certified Trainer and Innovator, and also Laura White. And Laura and Ben will introduce themselves when we get to their sections a bit later. Just talking about the agenda for today. So we're going to be looking at talking a little bit about why we plan for hybrid learning at the start. And then Laura's going to focus in on how we use Google Classroom and Google Drive to plan for hybrid learning. And then Ben's going to focus on Google Calendar, Google Chat, and Google Meet. So how those tools can be used in the planning phases of our work. And then finally, of course, we're going to do a Q&A session. So as we go through the webinar today, if there are any questions that you want to ask, feel free to put them in the chat on YouTube, and we'll jump in there and answer them as we go. Okay, so let's just get a bit started. Before I get started, just a reminder that this webinar is one of a series of webinars we're running every week, on a Tuesday at 3:30. So the information is at the link there, bit.ly/GFE UK webinars, and you can see the full range of webinars there. And also all of the resources from today, so the slide decks that we're using from this webinar, the previous webinars and the ones to come, are all available on a site we built for this purpose at canopy.click/hybrid. So everything we talk about and useful links are available there on the site. So just a bit of background, really. Why do we plan for hybrid learning? What is hybrid learning? Why are we planning for it? Right now, what we're seeing in schools is a real mixed phase of learning, because back when COVID first hit, we saw a lot of people partaking in online learning. Lots of schools closed, lots of education moved just to be online. So lots of people using Google Classroom to deliver online learning. But now we've potentially moved into a more difficult phase, because we've got students who are at home and students who are in school, potentially in the same class, and we're trying to deliver content to them. So we're thinking about this hybrid nature of trying to deal with students in both situations. And that's really what hybrid learning is about. And what we're going to focus on today is how do we plan, knowing this could be happening to us in our lessons, maybe when we get back after half term, how do we plan for this to take place? So we're going to be talking about the following. How do we design and plan for hybrid learning? And then how do we make sure that we're using collaboration to reduce workload? So one of the big concerns that I often have when we talk about online learning is that we might be in some way increasing workload. Well, if we do this smartly, if we set this up properly, if we think about how we can use the collaboration tools in Google, then what we should be able to do is reduce teacher workload to make this transition period, this area and this time as smooth as possible, because it's challenging enough to deal with this complicated situation in the classroom. And so that's what we're really going to try and focus on today as we go through the webinar. I talked about this in last week's webinar in a bit more detail, but just to remind people, we often talk about these two key terms when we talk about hybrid learning. The first one is synchronous learning. That's when we learn together in real time. A bit like some of you are doing now. Some of you will be watching this webinar live in real time. It means that you can comment in the chat. It means you can ask questions. Some of you are taking in synchronous learning right now. Or we might sometimes choose, for various reasons, to use asynchronous learning, where students are choosing their own time to come in and look at the materials and do the work. And of course, some of you might be watching this YouTube video back on our site afterwards. So you might be using this resource asynchronously. And so we're going to use these two terms as we go through today and we talk about planning for hybrid learning. I'm going to hand over now to Laura White. She's going to come on and also share her screen in to talk about how she uses Google Classroom and Google Drive to plan for hybrid learning. Hi, Laura. You're on mute, Laura, just to let you know.
Hi, Andy. Thank you very much for introducing me. Hopefully I'm back in now. So my name's Laura White. I've been a school teacher for 15 years. This year I'm taking a sort of a sabbatical of a kind to complete some research into digital learning at the Institute of Education in London. So when I talk about this stuff, I'm talking about it from my experience as a classroom teacher, but also as a digital learning trainer, Google Certified Innovator, Google Certified Trainer, etc. So that's where I come from. Today I'm going to talk about a couple of tools that I used a lot. And what I really want to stress, and something I talk to teachers about quite a lot, is you don't have to be the master of a million tools to be good at this. What I would always advocate for is to be really, really good at one or two things. Choose one or two tools which are really flexible, learn to use them so you're really confident with them. And from there, you can start to use them with all kinds of subtlety and nuance and really use them well, rather than jumping around over too many places. So even though this is a session about planning, I'm going to talk to you about Classroom because I think there's a couple of ways to use Classroom for planning that can really help with collaboration, as Andy's saying, without adding to workload, reduce any duplication that's going on, and make life easier for teachers and students as well at the planning stage before you even deliver. So what I've got set up here is an example Google Classroom page. None of these classes are live. They've only got Andy and Ben in them as co-teachers, but just as an example. So my subject back in my teaching days is religious studies. So typically I'd have a religious studies classroom. If you're outside the UK, religious studies is a subject where we teach the students, all children up to the age of 16 in the UK have to learn about at least 2 of the world religions. So typically at GCSE, they might be learning about Christianity and Islam, for example, or Buddhism or Sikhism. So this would be my classroom page here. So a couple of tweaks I'd make right away, recommended to make. If you hit the cogwheel here, when we're in any kind of hybrid or mixed mode, I would always simplify classwork. So I'd hide these notifications here. So stream just becomes dialogue rather than a duplication of classwork. So I'd leave students posting commenting on there. That's just a sort of basic for hybrid learning. I find it simplifies the page. So then stream becomes a communication channel and classwork becomes where the work goes. So that's a normal classroom so far, so usual. What I've been recommending, what we were doing through the summer term last term, is every academic department, and if you're in a primary school, I would say probably your year group class might work this way too, has a shared classroom page with no students in it. So what we do is we get our people and we make sure we've got all the teachers in my department. So I've got an imaginary religious studies department with Ben and Andy there as co-teachers. And what this means is, let's imagine that I've divided up my planning as a head of department. So let's say that I've put Ben in charge of year 9, I've put Andy in charge of year 8, and I'm going to be in charge of year 10. So when I want to post an assignment to year 10, if I post it here onto this classroom page, that means Andy and Ben can reuse those posts on their classroom pages. So the effect of that is that I can really craft that post and make it a really effective hybrid learning post and post it here one time. And then Andy and Ben on their classroom pages can just reuse the post. So I'll just walk you through those steps in a really kind of quick, simple way. So this is an example of a post that I've made. It's just very basic at the moment. And I've got all my resources up there for a whole lesson. And they're all numbered, and there's a system here that my students know and understand as activity 1, extract 1, extract 2, extract 3, extract 4, and a PowerPoint. So my students are pretty familiar with me working in this way. And on this one, I've got it so that every student can get a copy, but these ones they're just going to have as references to look at. Typically during hybrid learning, I'd break my instructions down here in quite a granular way. Sort of see step 1, read through this PowerPoint, step 2, make notes here. And for each task, I'd indicate how long I was expecting that task to take. So it'd take like 5 minutes or 10 minutes for this. And I'd itemize each thing so it's chunked. So rather than 6 posts, my students get 1 post with perhaps 6 activities in, and a really clear indication of what it is they've got to hand in, and potentially whatever the rubric might be that goes with that. So once I've made this and I've made it perfect, this is not perfect, this is just an example, and I post it onto this page, my department page, that for me is the same amount of work as it would have taken me to post it on my year 10 page. The difference is because Andy and Ben are both co-teachers on that department page, they can go to their pages and reuse that post. So if I go to classwork here and create, I can reuse this post. So it asks me which classroom I want to reuse it from. I'm going to say that one. Which post do I want? I'm going to say that one. And I have this option here to create new copies of all the contents, which is exactly what you would want to do. So in terms of speeding up workflow, rather than perhaps if you've got 5 classes in a year group or 6 classes in a year group, if one teacher is looking after that year group, making one really good hybrid learning post with your video content and your assessment criteria and all your gubbins in there, everybody else can really simply change their due date so that it fits their class and assign it to their own students. So it's a simple way of planning for hybrid when you're posting that, making that post, adjusting it so that it's a good hybrid lesson. And then, because that does take more time, and then from there, everybody else in their classrooms can just reuse that post. And when they reuse it, it will attach all of those assignments for each individual person. So I would recommend very strongly having either a departmental or a year group shared classroom that just has the teachers in it. You see there's no students here, where those crafted posts are shared, ready for use. So that's my first recommendation for you. Another thing that we did when we were in remote schooling is we had this topic called This Week, which again is just a useful general classroom tweak, not particularly a planning tweak. You can just create a topic. So this is actually a post about situation ethics. So I'll make that ready. So I can move this one to the top. So my students know that their work will always be found at the top. But when I'm ready to give them some new content next week, I can drop that down into there, and then I can post the fresh stuff into this week topic. So it's always really easy and really organised. Little tweaks that we can use in Classroom to help us out. So in terms of planning as a department, have a departmental page. It's also a really nice way of sharing content. There's a really nice add-on shared to Classroom you can get, and that means you can use BBC News websites, you can pull in content that's relevant to your subject. If everybody has access to that page, they can dump on shared activities, shared resources, prepared posts, and I think that's a really simple and really nice thing to do. What else in Classroom do I want to talk about? Rubrics. I think that goes generally with teaching, but again, in terms of sharing, we can talk about, if I've put a shared rubric on this assignment, if I edit this assignment now, I've posted it. And let's imagine that I'm going to ask the students to submit something here, potentially in a docs form. Again, if I make these changes to that master assignment, every time this assignment's reposted, this content goes with it. So let's just call that situation ethics essay. Okay, and then back here on the Classroom page, I can attach a rubric. And again, I can reuse a rubric that I've already created, or I can create a rubric here quite simply. And when I've done that, that goes with that assignment onto the next page. So really simple, useful bits and bobs on Classroom that I would advocate for. Next thing I want to talk about is shared drives. I think lots of us who started using Google way back in the day started out with My Drive. We're really comfortable working in My Drive, and then shared drives came in, and it was a new thing. It was called Team Drives, and that's been called shared drives. I think in terms of planning right now and how things are for everybody, it's really, really important that we are all sharing our resources. That's the other thing I want to say about Classroom, actually. Adding other people as co-teachers. So on your classes, add your colleagues, then they can see what you're doing, you can share good practice, but also if you can't post or can't catch in, somebody else can help you out posting. So if you don't have a shared drive yet, it's really simple to make one. So I'm going to walk you through the process of making a shared drive. I'm going to show you how you can add colleagues to it. And if you add new content in that shared drive, it's automatically shared with the people who share that drive with you. So I'm going to just make a new shared drive here. New. And you see I've just followed that new shared drive. Hello, shared drive. And it's going to follow here in with all of my other content. So at the moment, there's nobody in here, so that's really easy, and that I could potentially load in my schemes of work and my resources and then add people, or I can do it whichever way that I like. So I can manage members. Now, you have got quite a lot of control here. You don't have to give everybody full access. There are different roles in a shared drive. So I'm just going to add Ben. and Andy, just for the purposes of demonstration, to the shared drives. And I'm going to make them, I'm going to let them be contributors. So that means that I retain control of the documents. They can't accidentally delete things, but they can edit them and contribute to them. So it does work well to have somebody who's centrally in control. It might be in your school setup that you have an IT administrator or network manager who's going to be the lead on all shared drives. It's worth just thinking about it. Now here I am in my shared drive and I've got my people. And let's say I want to think about planning for hybrid learning. I'm going to make a sheet. So I can either do this here, and because I'm in the drive, if I click on new, anything it makes will make it in the drive. So that's really simple. Or I can use the sheets.new shortcut and then move it into the drive. If you don't know the .new shortcut, it's a nice little one. In the Google world, anything you do there which is ended with .new will automatically make you a new sheet, form, doc, Google Sites, etc. So the .new is quite a nice shortcut if you're not familiar with it. And you just move it into the drive. So here's my untitled spreadsheet. This is going to be my year 10 hybrid scheme of work. Now the beautiful thing about this is that the things we might think about for hybrid learning will be valuable whatever the context is next year. Because when we're thinking about hybrid learning, we're thinking about amplifying things like opportunities for collaboration, opportunities for feedback, opportunities for creativity, opportunities for assessment. So potentially I'm going to just add a little column along the top here, I don't know, unit. And at the top here, I'm going to put collab, assess, things that are particularly useful to think about in hybrid learning. Synchronous, asynchronous, feedback. Right. And then within here, because I'm in my shared drive, hoping that Ben is online and he might be able to hop in here and just show you collaboration. If you're not familiar with the Google tools, collaboration is really, really smooth and really silky. It's really, really easy to do. Because I've made this item in this shared drive, I don't have to manually share it. It's shared by default to everybody in that drive. So if I click on the share button just to show you, my Wi-Fi is a bit slow. What you should be able to see is it's already shared with 2 people, so I'm going to manually share it. So what's ideal is if we can encourage our colleagues to be in that habit of sharing by default, starting in that shared drive for things that are going to be used for school. And then it means that the content is all central and it's really much easier for people to work on. So can you see I've opened that sharing dialog? These guys are already in and they're already editors, so it's much quicker than manually making that document somewhere else and adding them as editors. So what we might have, you know, Andy's typing away in that column, but I'm actually going to insert a column there while he's typing. We'll catch him out, so we can say, oh, that's the topic. And what you can see, sometimes people haven't really seen sheets in action, seen the collaboration workflow. And that's a really good point. That's nice to be over there. So we can all be doing things at the same time. I've actually done stuff like this with rooms with sort of 90 students in at the same time. And as long as that collaboration is structured, the Google Collaboration Suite is so powerful that we're able to do this kind of collaboration in real time. So it doesn't matter that Ben's up in Oswald Twistle and I'm down in West Sussex and Andy's in Birmingham. We can work together on something really efficiently. The other nice thing about using these, because they're cloud-based, is you can insert your resources here. So we could have our lesson resources as another column, maybe here, if I pop it in here. And we can start introducing our Google Slides here as hyperlinks. Google Slides, hyperlinks to YouTube's, hyperlinks to useful websites that support this lesson, hyperlinks to assessment activities, hyperlinks to collaborative document templates. And so your scheme of work is so much richer. We might be thinking about it as a hybrid scheme of work, but in actual fact, it's a scheme of work which will be so much stronger for the following year, whether we're hybrid or not. I think it's a really useful use of department time. So if I go back to my shared drive, thank you very much, chaps. This hybrid scheme of work is here. Obviously, the other really powerful part of all the Google tools is that they're accessible wherever you are. So if you're not at school or if you haven't got your laptop, whatever else, you can easily get into all of this content on any of your devices, whether it's mobile device, iPad, laptop, school computer, Chromebook, whatever device you're on, it's flexible and it's really easy to access. So I think I'm coming to the close of this section. I think I'm going to come back to Andy. I'm going to have a little bit of Q&A about the ideas for planning for hybrid learning in Classroom and in Drive. I'm sure Andy's got some other pieces he wants to say, but let's take some questions. Thanks, everybody.
There were indeed some questions in chat, but one I was going to ask first was, this comes up a lot. Why would we use shared drives and not necessarily just make a folder in Google Drive and then just press share on that and put my RE teacher colleagues in there?
So perfect example is probably the fact that I was at my previous school for 10 years. And when I left, it took me a really long time to go through and share manually the resources that I needed to leave behind, that I wanted to give to my colleagues as I left. And that was a really slow process. If I just made those directly in the shared drives, it would have been really easy for me to hook out the one or two things that I wanted to take. I think most teachers are collaborative types. Generally, we're in this for the greater good. We're not in this for the money or the prestige in society. We want to share. So if you design from the shared point from the shared drives, you don't have to manually do all that adding. And just as you saw in the demonstration we did, if I'd made it from sheets.new, I would then have had to go in one at a time and add you and add Ben separately. And if you're in a department in a school, there's probably 6 or 7 people. It's just one less step. And I think every step we can take out of workflow and automate, we should, so that we have more time to think about our students, look after our own well-being, and do great lessons.
I think the important thing to note there, because it's the ownership in that drive is therefore owned by the drive. And so everything stays. It's a nice solid way of keeping resources in the one place. And I think it does take a lot of design as schools move over to using Google and moving G Suite to this concept of sharing by default. If you look at any Google product, if you go into Google Docs, Sheets or Slides, the one button that stands out more than anything else is the share button. The tools are inherently built around collaboration, but getting people into that pattern means from the very outset, from the day that you're right, we're going to do a new scheme of work and it's for hybrid learning or it's for next term. Okay, we're going to create a shared drive and we're going to put the folder in there and put all our resources in there, and that just gets teachers into that space to try and encourage that, because that's where the real wins come from. And I know Ben's going to pick up on this in a bit.
I also think that we do better thinking together. So any opportunities we can create for collaboration, the fact that we're not together might actually make some of our collaboration more focused. So having a shared doc like that open, while you've got a meet going on, talking about it as you do it, you can have your department meeting that way really easily and do something really purposeful.
Great. Thank you, Laura, for taking us through Classroom and Team Drives. Ben's going to join us now. Feel like we've got lots of RE teachers on the call today. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Andy. Hi, everyone.
So we're going to hand over, pop your screen in, and
take
it away.
Well, thank you. It is like an RE teacher overload. So to give you a bit of a background, my name's Ben Whittaker. I currently work at Burnley College in the north of England, hence the dulcet tones. Before that, I was 11 to 18 religious studies teacher for 11 years in the same school, and did a lot of work around data and around assessment around that as well. And then obviously I've moved to Burnley College looking after a few different roles, but one of the things I look at is digital transformation. And I also, somebody's put Go Clarets in the chat. I'm not a Claret. I live in Burnley. I work in Burnley, sorry, but I am not a Claret. I need to make sure I clarify that right now. So carrying on this idea about the idea of planning hybrid learning sessions. And I think one of the key elements there is about the idea about planning and about what does it mean to be a teacher who does planning. One of the things that we will do, like Laura's been talking about there, is about planning resources and how we can think about collaboration around resources. But one of the other elements is about planning how we physically do that as teachers, and how do we do planning in a hybrid world, or certainly in a remote world, and when we're forced into it, because we don't have those big team planning meetings like we used to do. So I remember when I first started teaching, one of my favorite things to do was to get out the A3 pieces of paper, get the different colored Sharpies out, and then we would do different themes or different ideas, and we plan that collaboratively. And then what we would do is we would then turn that into some kind of scheme for learning and resources off the back of it. And then what we did off the back of that, then develop that into some kind of digital format. As we developed, so we moved away from the traditional A3 piece of paper to moving on to some kind of collaborative document like a Google Doc or something similar. But one of the things that I think is important is understanding how we can use some of the maybe the tools that we take for granted within the Google suite here is what particularly something like calendar. So I'm on Google Calendar, as you can see on my screen now, and one of the things that I will do quite regularly is create an event. So let's just say I'm going to create an event for one day in a couple of weeks. I'm going to call this team meeting. Now I can change it so that it repeats every week. So every Monday, 2 till 3, we're going to have a team meeting. So this is a department meeting, or it might be a manager's meeting, or whatever else you look like. And because of this element of collaboration, I can add Google Meet conferencing directly within it, so that is a straightforward Google Meet link that the teachers or the people that will be in the meeting will join. And this sits in everybody's Google Calendar. I can determine which calendar I want it to be shown into. I can change the colours and all the things that go with that. But one of the things that really makes this collaborative, when I start adding people, Andrew and Laura, is I can add collaborative documents in here as well. So bear in mind, for those people who are maybe new to using any of the Google tools, everything that works in Google seems to be autosave, collaborative, intended for people to work together, as Laura was talking about with that Google Sheet. So I can click this little paperclip to add an attachment, and these attachments stay as live files. And I think it's important that we understand that there's live files here. So for instance, if I wanted to put a certain document in there, I can do that. I can put certain elements from my drive or from shared drives. I can upload from my computer or whatever else I want to do to add documents in here. So for instance, I'll just pick this Google slide presentation. That Google slide presentation would sit in this calendar event as a recurring resource every single time this calendar event is created. And I can, if I just put save here and give certain permissions, I'm sending that to people outside of my domain, and in my calendar now, recurring every week at that time is a meeting. And if I click that meeting, you'll see that even in 2 weeks' time, the same people are in it, and there is a collaborative slide deck that will be in there. Now, if we were working on that together, similar to how Laura was working on that Google Sheet together, that would be a working document. So every time it's updated in one place, it's updated in that calendar invite as well. I think that's really important, that when you normally would send an email attachment, or you might send an attachment as part of an email, it becomes a dead document as soon as it's been sent. And if you then amend it, or you want to work on that later on, it becomes a dead document. But imagine if that was a scheme of work that you're working on as a team, or if that was an agenda with all the minutes that you would be taking, that becomes a living live document, and you're not having to send version 27 of a document through. So just how you can use Google Calendar to help with that level of collaboration for planning. It just, as Laura keeps saying, it cuts down the steps and makes this a little bit more efficient in terms of workflow. One of the second elements, and I'm not necessarily going to share anything here, but one of the really nice new features within Gmail is the integration of chat and rooms and Google Meet within the same interface. So if you are opening your Gmail account, for example, it's easy to switch between Google Chat for instant messenger, for rooms that might be collaborative chat rooms within Google Chat, but also to be able to access and initiate Google Meets there's the video conferencing, or also you can join any that are prescribed in your calendar or that are scheduled to come up as well. So that level of integration and level of the fact that these things work together is a really nice little element and built in. And Google's really clever. I don't know why I call them clever, but Google are really clever in terms of what they're intentional around their the way that the user experience is part of, it is baked into the way that they think about design. So even things like Google Keep, where we can make little notes about where you're working, and Google Tasks tie this directly into your calendar. The final thing I want to talk about before we develop about how these things can tie together is thinking about Google Meet. So one of the biggest areas of change within the Google ecosystem over the last few weeks and months has been Google Meet. Now, this has become integral to many schools and colleges. So I work in a college in Burnley, as I've mentioned, and without Google Meet, we would have not been able to do the lessons. We wouldn't have been able to maintain learning. And we're quite proud at Burnley College that we are #1 college on the performance tables for 2019-20. And part of that is because we've thought about the idea of how we intentionally continue learning, even if there's a lockdown, even if we have to do a hybrid. So I still teach some A-level religious studies classes. And in those A-level religious studies classes, I regularly had 15 students, 5 that were isolated at home and 10 that were in the classroom in front of me. And so I could join a Google Meet that they were part of. And I think that was a really nice element, that we could do both things, and whether you're learning at home or whether you're learning in the classroom, you could still have this interaction and engagement. And I think that can be intentionally planned for. And if you're intentionally planning that and tying the things to do with Google Classroom, as well as using Google Meet, there is an element of being able to be intentional in your planning for hybrid learning. So when I look at Google Meet here, some of the tools that are involved in here, some of the newer tools that are part of the G Suite for Education. I'm on a personal account here, but on G Suite for Education, in terms of polls and Q&A and breakout rooms, they can be intentionally planned. So, for example, if you were to use a Google Doc to write down all of your poll questions that you're going to use and poll examples, you'll be able to then drag them across. Any links that you might be using in your chat, be able to bring them across so that you can be planned and thought through and prepared. As my good deputy principal, Mr. Jordan, tells me, that those fail to prepare to fail. So preparation is a key here in terms of planning for learning and this hybrid learning. But one example that I like to do is using Jamboard as an integration within Google Meet. So 3 dots down at the bottom. One of the new features is this ability to open a jam. And I can either start a brand new Jamboard now, and that would be a blank one, or I can choose one from the drive. Now, if you've integrated this with your Google Classroom and you've made a copy for each student, then you can showcase that. Or, while the circle of death is going round, it's coming. There's 2 circles there. Coming a jam that I created earlier, which is kind of a template that I want students to use. I can then share this, and that students can then have edit or view access. It is coming, I promise. I've paid my internet bill. But essentially, as this is loading through, what you can see then is Jamboard as a collaborative tool. So I've picked this planning template, and I'm going to open this jam. You can see now that on this Jamboard, any moment, I've created I've inserted an image of Plato's cave, because I'm a philosophy teacher. We always start with Plato, and I want them to outline the features of the cave on this image. Now, I could get students, whether they've got a touchscreen device or not, or I can get them to type this in if they haven't got a touchscreen. I can say, well, here is prisoners, or I've got a fire, I've got a walkway, These are all features that we need to be able to look at. We need to be able to look at that there's chains here. There's all sorts of things, and I will get them to then label these. Okay, so I'm just going to pick a few of these. I'm not going to do all the different features. Laura will probably love to think about the ones that I've missed, but there's some ideas, and the students can then have this as a planned template that they can use, and then I've given an extension there for the people who can develop it. So depending on what devices they've got or how they're working, whether they're at home or whether they're in the classroom, they can still do this same activity. This could be a collaborative deck that they all work on together, a collaborative Jamboard, or it can be individual ones, as I've mentioned. In the same way, I can create templates that I'm going to ask them to develop going forward. And I've done another one here for Aristotle's 4 causes. So here's a template of about the 4 causes that Aristotle says that make up the reason why a thing exists. So why does this Mars bar exist? What's the material cause of it? And what we could do here is essentially I've planned here by creating my resources to be able to use them directly within this Google Meet. So if I go in this Google Meet now, I've opened that jam, and that jam is part of the synchronous or asynchronous conversation that I'm having. So actually this would be a synchronous one, because the students that are at home, they're on a Google Meet, would still be able to see this, and the students that are in my classroom can also see this. So one of my favorite elements around thinking about what hybrid learning can look like is how do we maintain engagement? How do you plan for engagement? So you're going to know which students are going to be in the building and which students are going to be working from home. So you would think about you questioning, and that would be in my planning. I would always be thinking of the 20 students that would be in my classroom, and I'd be thinking, okay, I know that student might struggle with this because their target grade is X, or because they struggled on Y assignment, or they didn't do particularly well in this most recent assessment. So what we could do is do a really, really powerful planning tool, so that even when you're thinking about the people that are at home, you've got your webcam set up, and I've done this multiple times where I would go to the camera, the webcam, and I would say, Laura, you're at home. Can I ask you to unmute yourself and answer this question? And then they would answer the question, and then I would bounce that to somebody else who might be in the classroom. And then I would go back to Laura, and I'd say, Laura, well, Andy just said this. What do you think to that? And so what you would normally do in a classroom, you've planned for in a hybrid environment. So yeah, so there's some features there. We've looked at Google Calendar for planning for collaboration in terms of team meetings and shared documents. We've looked at how the integration in Gmail allows you for that communication between teams and between teachers, because sometimes the notifications in classroom and email just go on and on and on, but that instant messenger allows for that, and might make that a little bit easier by creating rooms or whatever else. And then thirdly, we've looked at some of the new features in Google Meet which will help with collaboration and planning templates. So I think I'm guessing there's probably some questions and answers in the or there's probably not some answers in the chat, but some questions that might want to come in. So if Andy and Laura can come back into the mix, that would be great.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Andy.
Thank you very much. There's a few different questions have come up in the chat, so we're going to go to chat and just take some Q&As. If anyone's got any questions about any of the topics we've covered today, or anything relating to the wider topics of hybrid learning, now's a great time to drop them in the chat for them to be answered. But I've already seen a few in there. So earlier on, we had a question about, I'm just going to try and read it out again. It was a question about appointment slots in Google Calendar. So I thought I'd take this one first. I've got my calendar in up on screen here, or my nice blank calendar. My own calendar is not so clear. And just want to talk about appointment slots. So within Google Calendar, normally when we draw our little box to create our little meeting, by default, we just create a standard meeting in Calendar over here. But as you can see on the left here, we've got some other choices. And so we've got event, I've got out of office, we've also got appointment slots. And appointment slots, that's creating a space in your calendar to allow you to book, to create these slots people can book meetings with. So maybe you're going to run with students, office hours, maybe as somebody asked in the question there, you want to do specific timings for certain review meetings, it's entirely up to you what the slots might be. But in this case, I'm going to just make some what I'll call office hours slots. So maybe I'm going to have that time slot there and just press save. And then maybe I'm going to do another slot there. Oh, I might have actually forgotten to press press appointment slots on that. And let's do those ones again there, office hours. And as you can see, this slot's duration is set to 30 minutes at the moment. So maybe I don't want 30 minutes in the slot. Maybe I only want 5-minute slots for my students. Press save again. So what I'm creating here on the second one is I'm creating these slots in my calendar that people can book. And as you can see, it says here, go to appointment page for this calendar. So when I click that link, this is what my students would see. They would see a calendar. It's actually overlaying my own personal calendar on this now. And we're seeing these slots where these meeting times are available to book. And so the important thing about this is we're allowing people then to come in only when we want them to book time slots in a calendar. And they can't see our whole calendar. So we're not sharing our entire calendar with them. We're simply sharing the slots that we're available to say, we'll pick a slot, book a 5-minute slot. And they obviously fill their details in, puts it in your calendar. And at that point, creates the Google Meet link. So if you want to do it online, you are all set up and synced to do that. So in terms of that, you build your slots in calendar. You create the link to appointment slots and you can go that way. So I hope that answers the question somebody was asking about appointment slots.
Andy, is it worth mentioning about parents' evenings doing it that way?
Yeah, so you could use this wider. Just call a word of warnings around parents' evenings. The first one is that for security reasons, Google made a change to the way Google Meet works earlier in the year. And that means that unless you've done something about this, only accounts from Google for Education accounts can come in to calls, and people can't just come onto a Google Meet call if don't have a Google account or just by putting a name in, which they could previously. And so what I would suggest is if you're going to use a Google Meet for Parents Evening, you need to open a support ticket with Google to turn that feature off. Otherwise, parents will have issues accessing that. But you could, in theory, as you can imagine, go to the night of the Parents Evening, create the appointment slots, put 5-minute appointments in, get the link for each teacher, and send that out to parents. It works well, particularly with things like primary schools, where a set of parents are going to see one single teacher. We can send that link out; they can book these slots. So, it can be used for Parents Evening as well in that way.
But if you've got student devices, if the parent comes in on the student device, then that can be one way around of solving the appointment issue because the device is signed into the domain. Could be
another way of doing that if you want to go down that route as well. That could be another solution to that, accessing those parents' evenings. So that was one of the questions we got asked. We also had a question about let's find the right question. The different tools. So it's the breakdown of different tools. So what's available in the standard accounts and which features are enterprise for education. So Ben, you showed Jamboard integrated in there. So that's a standard feature. So all Google for Education accounts in Google Meet can access Jamboard by going to that feature. But there are some enterprise features coming out into Google Meet. And so breakout rooms is an enterprise feature, and Q&A polls, they're another enterprise feature that's coming out into Meet. So we're seeing some enterprise features coming out, but then also a whole load of new features, particularly security features, coming to everybody. I know that we dropped a link in the chat a while ago. That's a really great blog post from Google, and explains all the new features that come into Meet and the best link to go to access and explains really clearly then which ones are for everybody and which ones for enterprise accounts only. So use that blog post as a reference if you're not sure about the features that are coming into Google Meet. And then we also had a question about will Google Meet provide private chat? So some of the other products on the market can do one-to-one private chat. Can Google Meet do that? That's currently not a feature that we see in Google Meet. And if you look on the blog post, it's not a feature that's mentioned on the blog post either. Obviously, I can't predict what features are coming beyond that. I have no way of knowing what features are coming wider. But what I can say is that Google are very responsive to feedback on features. So if you think that's a feature you need in all of the Google products, you can usually press the question mark and then it will say leave feedback, and you can say, actually, I think it would be great if we could have a one-to-one chat feature in Google Meet. And ultimately, based on the number of requests a feature gets, that's what gets things into, into development. So, enough people must have pressed it for breakout rooms or for Jamboard integration with Meet to get those features into the main product. So feel free to send that feedback in. Of course, there are other ways you can use other chat tools to have conversations. Both Google Chat itself can obviously have that feature to message somebody directly. And so I can sort of message Ben directly, during this call if I want to send him a message, or Laura. There is the ability to do that in chat. And of course, also the ability to use Google Classroom for some chat. So sometimes I would say to students, when I'm in a Meet call running a class, can we have all our questions and answers in our Google Classroom stream page rather than in Meet? You might think, well, why do I want them over in Classroom? Because if I put them in Classroom, I get a really good record of everything that was asked. And obviously, just like you guys have been doing so in this video, somebody else pipes in with an answer and it's students helping other students. That's really great to see. If we do that in Meet, of course, it just sits there in Meet and then it's sort of gone. Now, of course, you do get a record back, but ultimately it's sort of lost from the student view. So sometimes I will specifically on a call with students say, let's use Classroom as our chat space. And one of the new features we can do now is we can turn off the chat in Meet to really force them over to Classroom if we want. So question.
Can I just mention as well from the chat as well? There's a comment there that's made by Donald Hurley, who talked about live shared documents makes meetings virtually self-minuting. It is extremely cool. So what it does is it means one of the features that I really like is that ability to be able to create minutes in a meeting and then send with a little comment, a little plus, and it gives a live it gives a comment feature, so it goes directly to that person. But also, as everybody's collaborating on it and putting their bits into it, it becomes a really useful tool, and nobody's having to type minutes up later on. You're doing the minutes as you go, and so I think that's a really nice tool. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I use this in every meeting that I go to. I don't ever type up minutes afterwards, and my administrators who are in my team love the fact that I never ever have to send them minutes to type up, because then they can't have to understand my scroll. So yes, a massive bonus.
I wanted to come back on Keely's question, because I think when you're asking about Meet during the chat, I think we're talking about kind of knowledge checks as you go along. And so I would probably have like a really basic reusable Google form with just like some really simple yes, no, or scaled questions. And I can just reuse that many times. I call it my Goldilocks form. I'm happy to share it later. Which is like, is this porridge too hot, too cold, or just right? Is this lesson moving too fast? Is it the right pace? Is it going too slow? Those kind of tools. The beautiful thing, obviously, you make it, you can reuse it as many times as you want. And if you make it non-specific to the lesson, general, kind of true or false, and a scale, you can just reuse it over and over again to get a really quick snapshot of where your class is alongside a live lesson. And that works whether you're in the classroom or at home or both, or a mixture.
Great, Laura, thank you for that, and thank you everybody for the questions today that have been in chat, and obviously keep them coming. We should be hanging around in chat for a while longer just to answer any more questions that come up. Just want to remind people of a few different things before we wrap up today. So don't forget, you can always access the resources from today's session, including the slides we've used, and Ben and Laura have added some more detail to the slide deck to cover some of the particular topics that they demonstrated in their section. And that's over at canopy.click/hybrid. That's the link to access all the resources from today. And of course, the video stays live on this link as well. So if you want to watch any of this back, feel free to revisit this page where the video stays for future reference back on this site. But otherwise, it just leaves me a bit of time to thank Laura and Ben for joining us today and taking us through some uses of the tools. I hope that's been useful for people watching. And we'll see you all again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.